process of making cement and steel, aviation, heavy shipping, things like this, where you run into things that are chemistry problems in some cases, and you run into agency problems in others. So how do we move collectively here towards deploying capital that is constructive, both develops new technologies, but also solves problems, like gets things in motion? And I'm curious, any of you on the panel who would like to jump in on that? Dylan, I see your hand.
I think Lynn was.
I think Lynn's first? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, ladies first.
No, age before beauty.
And definitely
which is true. Now, what I was going to say was the great advantage of the price on carbon is the lever that it gives to the development of more technology. So if you take carbon capture, and a lot of the technologies, we know how to make blue hydrogen, we know how to make green hydrogen, we know how to do biomass, but none of it is economic. No one will pay for it, because once it replaces the fossil fuel, whether it's fossil fuel in cement or steel or turning our electricity and so forth on, as long as we're not paying for that, then there's not an economic incentive to invest in the big solutions. We have an economic incentive to invest in wind and solar. So from 1992 to 2019, wind and solar went from 0% of energy to 3%. In 2020, it increased by 20% solar, and that means it'll double in 4 years. And wind increased by 17%, so it'll double in 6 years.
And with a cost decrease of 90% as well.
With a cost increase, but at the end of the day, that's going to only be 30% of, so in 2 decades, it'll be 30% of our needs. So if we don't turbocharge the big solutions, like carbon capture can really help the planet. And that technology is inside of oil and gas companies. They're the ones who know how to do that, but it doesn't cost $50 a ton, it costs $100 a ton. But it begins to become investable, either because you say, I'm going to do it, even if I lose money, and I think you'll see some companies doing that. But imagine if we had the lever of the capital markets, where the return was actually there for these investments. So it's not a lack of science and technology and innovation. It's a lack of economics, and in return, it's a lack of political will. So if the politicians could garner the will to place a price, then the market could solve the problem.
I'm curious, what's going to make a politician make that decision? Like, what's going to inspire that? And because I think this is a capital markets discussion, but it all has to run back through politics and policy. Like, what might inspire that change? Is there something happening now? Is there something that could happen in the future to make that change effective? Dilhan.
Well, I wouldn't want to venture into what goes into a politician's mind. That'd be very dangerous.
Fair enough.
But maybe I'll just say something. It's just follow up on what President Jin said. I think that governments need to be upfront with the population as to what it really means to do the transition. Okay. And remember, it's a journey. Okay, if you want to get to 2050, it's 29 years from now. Doesn't mean that we wait for the last 5 years. We start now, but it's a journey. And as you go along, the cost curve, the carbon abatement cost curve should come down if you see an acceleration of capital being deployed. Now, what does it take to have that capital being deployed at that accelerated pace? Well, you need breakthroughs, first of all, but you need an incentive. That's where governments come in, to provide the framework for an incentive, whatever that means. It could be grants, it could be part of the carbon tax, etc., but you need incentive. Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Bill Gates' firm, took money from a bunch of very wealthy people, and he said to them, well, you're putting money in here, but don't expect to make money from it. But they've invested in a number of decarbonization solutions and are actually, on the face of it, generating returns. So even though you're deploying capital as a force for good, there is that opportunity of